So as an arts major, you would imagine I'm a fairly visual person. And as someone who started writing stories when I was 3, you would also imagine I'm a bit of a storyteller. What I want to tell you today is that I've recently been able to combine the two as a visual storyteller, which is something that I've had in me since I was very young, but I haven't realized until recently. So as most kids do, or most parents do, I got a little toy camera when I was a kid. It was nothing fancy, a little piece of plastic that a bunch of different colors, a button that you click, and then whatever. But they noticed how I would always hold this camera like a real camera, and how I would treat it not like a kid shoving it in their mouth, throwing it on the floor, carrying it everywhere. But I did treat it like a real camera. So eventually my parents went out and bought me another camera, a real camera, a digital camera. Not exactly the most expensive kind because I'm still a kid and I'm probably gonna drop it, but they bought me a camera and I did carry that thing everywhere like a little stuffed animal. I used it to take pictures wherever I went. My mom worked at a Jewish community center and I would go there and I would use my camera to take pictures of the summer camps for middle schoolers, for elementary schoolers, for the preschool, for community events. And that was sort of my gateway to the community. It was how I was able to connect with people around the center and how I was able to really, in a time where I was a bit socially isolated, connect with the people around me and put myself into the world. And that was for me at that time, it was a very important part of my development. And so I carried on like that for a number of years while I had that camera. We would take it everywhere, take it on family vacations, until one day, on one particular vacation, it got submerged in salt water. Not by me, mind you. I was very good with this camera. And so my parents were like, okay, we broke your camera, we'll buy you a new one. So at the same price point or so, they bought me another camera. But because it was years later, the technology had advanced, so it was a better camera. And this thing, it was a little point and shoot. I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was not. I would carry it everywhere again and take pictures even more places as I grew older and my community circle expanded. I would bring it around more and I would take more pictures. And again, this was my way of communicating with the world. Now, flash forward a number of years until about last year during our theater department portfolio review, where I had used this camera to take pictures of some of my design work. And the important thing about portfolio is the pictures, because there's no really good way to drag a whole theater troupe into the room and hang a bunch of lights on the spot. So pictures serve a very important role. And I'm showing these pictures taken on my little camera that I thought was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they were like, hey, your work is great, your pictures aren't. And one professor was like, hey, let me teach you how to use a real camera, a real DSLR, like the professional cameras. So I was like, okay, free camera lessons. I would normally spend like $50 on this. So, hey, I'll go for it. So I did, and I learned a whole lot more about the technical side of photography, which I found very interesting as an engineer and someone with a sort of a sciencey technical background. I had sort of already used a camera to make the interpersonal connections and compositionally, and now I was learning the technical side of it. And I really learned a new way to appreciate photography and interacting with people. So I got this camera, at that time I had borrowed a camera from the library, but then I was like, hey, I found this camera on sale. I really should get a real camera if I want to be serious about design. So, hey, I'm just going to buy a real camera. And so I did. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to buy a real camera, I might as well use it and not have it sitting on the shelf. So that's when I started going out into the world and using this not just to connect with people, but also to connect with myself. And so I started going out a lot more, going on adventures, because I figured, I'm not going to want to take pictures of the same trees in my backyard and the same VCU campus that I walk every day. I'm going to want to go out and explore. So having a camera has really taken me to a lot of new places that I would not normally have been to. So for example, Belle Isle, Pocahontas State Park, and then I actually went out to Natural Bridge State Park over winter break for a photography contest that I did not win. But I still got out, and the point is, I was able to use photography to get out and to explore. And as someone who's more recently been going through a bit of social isolation and not quite sure where I am in the world, photography has definitely helped me get out and be able to spend time in the real world, and I think most importantly, to be able to see myself in the world and to see the world from a different viewpoint. Because as a photographer, or photography in general, is supposed to be like the eye. So really, being able to use a camera has helped me learn a lot about how we see things, and especially as a lighting designer, how light works with everyday objects. And so doing photography for me has really taught me a lot about visual storytelling and how to use a picture to communicate something, whether it be what Richmond looks like from atop, I think this was on a parking deck, or how light and shadow play with different structures. This is the engineering building under construction. But photography has really taught me a lot, not just about lighting and not just about the outdoors, not just about connecting with people, but really it's also taught me a lot about how we see the world and how we can make stories out of images, and not just still images, but I've also recently started, ever since I got the camera, I was like, well, it also takes video, so I might as well do a little vlogging. And in addition to photography, having a camera has also taught me a lot about the moving picture aspect of visual storytelling through editing and through like after composition, not just in one image, but also as a whole. So photography and videography has taught me a lot about that. And not only has it taught me to get outside, but it's also taught me to be more active, which has also been very important more recently as I've found myself more sedentary. But what I want to, sort of the challenge I want to issue you today is we all have like iPhones in our pockets, even if we don't have a nice camera. And like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I want to ask you, what are your 1,000 words? What story are you going to be telling with your photography or your memories? Thank you.